Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Show to V with Mike G, the show of a life, the show of John Carpenter, the show of punk rock, the show of all the things I want to talk about. Today's guest is the amazing Ewan Morgan of Diageo, one of the most brilliant and insightful, informative guys in the Scotch whiskey business. We sat down recently when he was in Austin, Texas, outside for a little bit. It was a beautiful day, some palm trees, a pool, some frozen drinks, but yet the heat toasted my laptop, so you'll notice a little bit of a volume dip and a change in topics as Ewan is talking about his kids, so that's a little bit of insight for you there. Another piece here is we talked about the Game of Thrones scotches before the finale just last Sunday, and you can get to see what Ewan's perspective and his theories are about how the show ended now that we know how the show ended. So, without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this great chat with Ewan Morgan of Diageo.
So, if we backtrack to prepubescent Ewan,
Sure.
Prepubescent Ewan was listening to probably a lot of Black Flag.
Perfect, I was going to ask that.
A lot of Pixies.
Yeah.
He was also listening to Bad Religion because everyone cuts their teeth with Bad Religion.
Favorite, yeah.
Dag Nasty, DC based,
Yes.
hardcore band.
Minor Threat, right? Anyway,
Minor
yeah,
Threat. Well, they're a given,
Yeah.
and then you kind of move into your more kind of political stuff. Obviously Minor Threat being very political. Nation of Ulysses,
Yes.
bands like that.
Dead Kennedys, right? For you too?
Dead Kennedys, yeah. Again, that was more when I was younger, when
Yeah.
I was listening to Jello Biafra and No Means No and
Yeah.
Dead Kennedys and all of that good stuff. So a real mixed match. So I'm not like Biggie Tupac. There's no East Coast West Coast beef. I'm fairly bipartisan.
Because you were on a third
punk.
coast somewhere, right?
Yeah, I was in Speyside in Scotland, the heartland of hardcore whiskey.
So if you think about it, go back to Talisker 10, right? Because again, this is this unsung hero. It's not massively popular, but it has a cult following.
Yeah.
Can you think of a band that reminds you of Talisker 10?
Well, Talisker 10, and you've probably done your homework on me, is one of my favorite whiskeys of all time. So much so that my cat is called Talisker, and she
Wait,
is.
real quick, is it Tal Whisker?
No,
Talisker?
that would be too clever for me.
I see, okay.
It's just Talisker. She's small, black, and fairly bipolar. Sometimes she's the nicest cat on earth, and sometimes she's not so nice, and she will swipe at my face when I go downstairs, things like that. I still love her to pieces, but Talisker 10 is salty. It has a really wonderful peppery smoke to it.
Yeah.
It can be a little polarizing for some people because they're maybe used to bourbons or Canadian or Irish whiskeys, which are a little easier on the palate. Then they taste something like Talisker. It's like a taste explosion.
Absolutely.
It's like the first time you have an oyster. It's a fairly binary thing. You either like it or you don't, or then you become accustomed to it over time. I see Talisker as exactly the same thing. So if I had to pin a band on it,
Because these are perfect adjectives for a few bands that come to mind for me.
All right, you go first.
Well, I go first. Well, okay, so I was thinking Circle Jerks, because Greg Morris is very, very hard to get close to. But once you do, okay, I like this guy. He talks maybe a little bit too much, right? And he is a salty guy, not to be literal, but that's a band that's kind of polarizing because of the way he sings, Ron.
I was going to say Melvins.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Again, a polarizing band.
Sure.
Kind of noisecore punk that, Their attitude towards music was kind of pushing the boundaries. It was fairly edgy. Their live shows were not kind of cut and paste punk shows by any means. It was almost them and the Dwarves. You either liked them or you didn't like them. And in fact, I was listening to a podcast with Buzz from Melvins, and he was talking about when they went on tour with Faith No More, when Faith No More made it big, and Faith No More was selling out like stadiums and stuff.
Real Thing Days?
Yeah, Real Thing Days. So like when Epic came out and it became this MTV like super hit, kids were turning up to go and see these kind of anthemic pop punk songs, and then the Melvins were supporting them, and all these kids are like, what the fuck is this? So those people were like walking out and going into the parking lot and everything, waiting for like the headline act to come on. In fact, Mike Patton got so annoyed with it that he would start to do like old school like punk versions of their songs just to annoy these kids.
Man.
And he got more and more agitated throughout the course of it, and more kind of disconnected with their fan base, and it's maybe why he went a little potty. Maybe.
It's interesting how it went, but I like that. So, all right, so here's the thing about the Melvins I think that really, really relates. I can relate to Talisker. It's a big wall of sound, Scotch.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's you could say dark way. There's so many different ways to describe it, but it is so big and so round, and it is loud.
Yeah,
just like the Melvins. It's not that it's inarticulate, but it forces you to make a choice right then and there. It's a binary Scotch.
Yeah. There's another band that popped into mind, and they're not really punk or anything like that. They're like drone metal, and they're called Sun.
Sun, I haven't
They're
heard
from
Sun.
Seattle. They're now LA based. It's a 2-piece experimental drone metal band.
Yeah.
And when you go and see them live, they're not an album band, although they do albums. They did one with Scott Walker, actually.
What, before we passed it, presumably?
Yeah. So they did an experimental album with him. But their albums are like, it just sounds like a noise. But when you go and see them live, it's a sensory thing. So you sit there and it's this kind of brown noise washes over you.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen like My Bloody Valentine live, it's kind of the
wall
same
of sound.
jam.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. So it's just hits you there, and your chest reverberates. I was actually there with folks from the Washington Post. I saw them at 9:30 Club in D.C. And the photographer was trying to take pictures through this fog bank that they pumped the stage with, and he couldn't take pictures because everything was coming out blurry. He thought he had faulty kit, so he went and swapped out his kit in his truck, came back, and then still the same thing. And then he realized his eyes were actually resonating so hard that he couldn't focus properly. So Sun, S-U-N-N.
Yeah.
They're named after an old 1960s, 1970 amplification brand.
It's amazing bass amp, man.
Yeah, and they're noisy. Check them out.
I like that, and I absolutely will. So music, there's always that parallel between spirits and music for me, for sure. And we'll talk more about kind of your perspective on Scotch and the modern realm and all of that. But, I was looking at your decorated history over 28 years in whiskey and such. But one of the things that kind of was brought to my attention is that there's this gap in the 90s where I feel like you went on a nomadic voyage after you left Maltman.
I did. I did, yeah. So I worked in the whiskey industry from the age of 16. When I left school, involuntary left school, I was asked to leave school.
For what?
I can't really go into it.
Sure.
But it involved whiskey.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Yeah. So, I kind of pioneered my kind of whiskey salesman technique.
It's foreshadowing, right?
Yeah. Again, without getting into too much trouble, I was advised that leaving school was probably a good idea. So I left school on the Friday, started work very early on Monday morning, shoveling malt at Tamdu Distillery. Did that for a few years and then decided I'm going to kind of do other things.
Yeah.
Left the whiskey industry for a period of time. Lived in France, in the south of France, in a tent for a year.
Amazing. What were you doing for work?
I was working on yachts in a town called Antibes, between Cannes and Nice. I then came home for a little bit, couple of months, and my sister, who lived in Israel at that point on a kibbutz, she said, why don't you come out and hang out here for a couple of weeks? You'll enjoy it.
Sure.
It's sunny. It's nice. There's a pool. There's lots of young Scandinavian girls work here as well.
It's kind of like right now. We're around palm trees, a pool, and Scandinavian women.
Yeah. It's very similar. There's less falafel and chicken pots and pomelo fields.
That's very, very true.
Kibbutz. So I went there and then ended up staying there for a year. Worked on different kibbutz, looked after 6,000 chickens at one point. So I would go in there with my headphones on, listening to punk rock, picking up chicken eggs every morning. That was an interesting job. And then I worked as various things. I was a taxi driver. I worked as a chef. I was making hummus at one point. I was working in a nightclub at one point. I was a painter and decorator.
Living it up.
I did everything and anything basically, and loved it.
But you also, it looks like you got a few degrees and a few specialties at that point too, right?
When I came back to the UK, I put myself through college and was working at the same time, and then I put myself through university. Had a couple of kids throughout the course of that period as well, and gave myself a computer science degree. So I have a computer science degree.
Interesting. What were they coding in back in that day?
COBOL. Java.
That tells me how old you are.
ActionScript for Flash. All of those
lots of macromedia.
Lots of dead languages that are pointless now. So if I ever went back into the computer world, I'd be effed. Thankfully, I don't have to. And then, actually, weirdly, because of that, I had a couple of jobs, tech-based jobs.
Yeah.
And then one of them actually was with a whiskey company, which were called Morrison Bowmore, which were part of Suntory.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a job with those folks. They found out my whiskey background, and then they had me doing more and more ambassadorial things, going to whiskey shows, traveling around, going to Japan. I got the chance to visit their distilleries in Japan, which was phenomenal. And then I did that for a few years, I think 7 or 8 years, and then Diageo approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in moving to the States? And I was like, no, not really. And then they asked me again, and on that day, they got me when I was probably at my weakest point because the weather was garbage, and that's probably 90% of the time in Scotland. But the weather wasn't great. I didn't feel like the next step was completely visible to me. So I was like, you know what? I'll talk to my wife. I spoke to my wife, and she's like, sure, let's do it.
So she was into it?
Yeah. So we sold our house. We sold our cars. We took our kids out of school. And my kids had never been to the States before. We flew over in 29th of October 2010. And I've been here ever since.
Where about? Where's it, New York?
I live in Annapolis, Maryland.
Annapolis?
Yeah.
Interesting. You're sending the kids off to Camp David?
Sailing capital of America. You know, it's a drinking town with a sailing problem is the joke that they have there.
Well, there's maybe a nautical theme here. You're working in the south of France on some yachts. Is these skills transferable to Annapolis?
Not
You
really.
fish a bit. I see there's
I do like to fish. I grew up fly fishing in the River Spey. I haven't had a huge amount of opportunity to fish over here. But funnily enough, I was in New York last week, and I was talking to a friend of mine who works in a bar in the East Village called Yves, and he's a fly fisherman, and he invited me to go fly fishing in upstate New York. I was actually in Aspen a few weeks back as well, and met another guy who ran fly fishing there. So I may try and get back into it, but I'm a catch and releaser.
Me too.
Type person.
You know what also is an ideology that kind of goes along with punk rock? It's funny and as visceral as the music is sometimes, and maybe even violent, but it was always as a counterreaction to things, right? Animal rights is a really big thing. Did you kind of feel that way as a kid and kind of now?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very leftist community.
Yeah. But
again, I mean, you covered the whole gamut when you're looking at hardcore, because you could look at people like G.G. Allen, for example.
Yeah, that's true.
Who is probably the most extreme of that kind of New York hardcore CBGB scene. Probably wasn't too much into animal rights.
No, he was just doing drugs. I doubt he had any time to eat anything.
Self-mutilation.
Yes, that's right.
and heroin, I think, was de rigueur for that fella.
Absolutely.
But he ended up dead at a fairly young age. But then you have other bands, like Propagandy, who we were talking about earlier on.
Veganism, I think, was
ultra vegan, ultra leftist. Kind of anti-corporation punk ethos that they have, and there's many like hardcore bands that Fugazi, obviously being another one, Minor Threat.
Although Ian MacKay apparently eats cheese now.
Oh, he does?
Artisanal cheese, yeah. One of my friends worked at a cheese shop in D.C. She'd run into him and sell him stuff.
I did not know that.
It's not heartbreaking. As an adult, I feel okay about this. As a kid, I might have been a little upset, right?
Do you want to know a fun fact about cheese? When I lived, this is a good story, a great cheese segue. When I lived in Israel, I lived in the Afula Valley near Nazareth, and there was, and I think still is, a cheese shop there called Cheeses of Nazareth. There's a little cheese segue as I sip on my delicious cocktail.
That's the kind of joke that the echelon of joke I'm looking for. That's about as far as I go. And I'm not even a dad, but that's still right in the wheelhouse of making these punny jokes. I'll tell you something. Diageo's been a really good partner for me too, and like the way that their PR companies work and things. But I was thinking about what might be a dichotomy working for a corporation. But when I was talking to Jorge, who he wanted me to tell you he was excited we were talking and that you are one of his favorite bosses of all time.
One of. You could have rephrased that. I'm gonna have words with him after this. If he's not careful, I'll tell you the yurt story involving him. I'll do it when we get off mic.
Whatever I can take back to embarrass him would be great.
All right. Once we stop recording, I'll tell you the yurt story, and you can text him, and it will make your day my day, and not his.
But you know, you don't have to comment on this like with any great detail, but it feels like, you know, when you get older, you wrote your novel, and you're saying, you know, what I really want to get into now is mentorship. I want to pay my success forward to younger people or to people that perhaps don't have as much access. And so Diageo has this program with the likes of Pedro Almas and Ewan, where you guys are actually giving them money because you want a diversified portfolio and you want to actually help people that perhaps don't have access to capital and stuff. This is kind of a shift for Diageo, because it seems like to open things up and create a very, very bigger narrative.
It's definitely something that they've been focusing more on over, I would say, the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah. And that's down to various things, you know, corporate responsibility being a huge one. Our sustainability record is phenomenal, and I'm not just saying that as a corporate shill.
Well, and I'm not a shill either, right? Like I do this out of my own. So I'm talking about the positivity of Diageo because I had an at-length conversation with Jorge about it, and I think it's worth noting.
Yeah. So, for example, brands like Pedro Almas or even Don Julio, you know, when they're looking at local communities, it's the communities that make the brand.
Right.
And that is, you know, specifically with Pedro Almas, you know, they're supporting their local community. They're offering employment. But even if you go further back, you look at Ron Zacapa.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Zacapa, they were looking at the impoverished villages in Guatemala after the revolution there. And they were seeing, you know, this destitution there. So when they were looking for suppliers for their patati, which is the woven band that goes around every bottle, they were actually going to the villages and employing people in the villages.
Yeah.
You know, giving them a job so they could sustain themselves and sustain their families. And then you look at the distilleries, Zacapa, you know, they've been 100% energy efficient for nearly 2 decades. And nobody talks about that.
No, that's what I'm saying.
You know, they've been burning their big gas and running their own generators to create enough energy that they overproduce, and they put energy back into the national grid.
Yeah.
If you go all the way over to Scotland at Cameron Bridge Distillery, it's 115 million litres capacity a year. It's a huge, huge distillery. Yeah. It's 95% energy efficient because the spent grain is added to what we call aerobic respirators, and then bugs and microbes attack it, create methane. We then ignite that methane in turbines, and it generates the energy for that distillery.
So I know, because I could go to any length of scientific granularity with you on distilling, but one thing when Jorge was saying, because I'm a very huge fan of mezcal and have studied it for quite a while now, and he was saying that when they grow mushrooms with the bagasse, that it de-acidifies it and makes it a better fuel source as a block of agave fiber, which I never even thought about, that relationship or the reciprocity between fungus and spent agave.
I can't believe you just said reciprocity and fungus. I think that's another punk rock band, right?
Yeah, probably.
Fungal hardcore. It's a new category for you. Yeah. But yeah, that whole kind of cyclical thing where they're looking at, here's our byproduct, what can we do with our byproduct?
Yeah.
We can either use it as a source of fuel, or we can use it and use all of the, you know, the goodness that's in it, the microbial goodness in it, to grow something else.
Sure.
And in this case, it's going to be fungus,
yeah,
which they will then commercialize, and then they will sell as an artisanal fungus. There's another punk rock band for you. So it's wonderful that, you know, the distilling industry, and not just the distilling industry, but the alcohol industry in general, are looking at what their byproducts are and looking how those can be repurposed. So there's no or very little wastage.
Yeah.
And even down to the point, again, going back to sustainability, Diageo, as the largest spirits producer in the world, stopped using plastic straws. Last year, they outright banned them. We don't have them in any of our bars. And when we do events, we don't want to have them there. We have like sustainable straws there made from bamboo or hay or paper, recycled paper. So even these little changes over time make a huge impact to the environment. And our distilleries are offsetting not just energy, but offsetting water. So we're trying to recycle as much water as possible. Cameron Bridge, by next year, will be recycling 55% of the water used in there, which is going to be one of the highest in the industry.
And to kind of level set folks on Cameron Bridge, they make a massive amount of GNS, right, for Tanqueray and some other...
Yeah, they make small boutique brands like Smirnoff and Gordon's Gin and Pimm's and Tanqueray.
See, but that's one of the behind-the-curtains distilleries. A lot of folks, unless they dig into it, they don't really realize, like, the same neutrals coming from these places, and then all the other variability comes from the individual people putting botanicals and stuff in it.
Yeah, so like your base spirit is coming from the same stills, but then, in the case of gin, Tanqueray, it then goes through an additional distillation process. And in the case of Tanqueray 10, it goes through then again another distillation process in a very small still called Tiny 10, where all the citrus is then distilled and then added to the other distillates that we have coming through, and they create these new wonderful flavors. And then the grain whiskey, a lot of the grain whiskey that we use in Johnny Walker, for example, comes from Cameron Bridge as well as some other grain distilleries.
Yeah, so it's kind of, after a while when I was listening to records, I'm like, I really like this record, I really like this record. And then I realized they were all produced by Gil Norton.
Or Steve Albini.
Steve, of course, right? That crazy lunatic of a motherfucker. But yes, but so that's the thing. It's this arterial distillery that connects all these spirits we're very familiar with. You know? And I love that, because when you kind of just start to take a 10,000 foot view of it, you start to see everything. And the massive output of...
Well, it's also a very old distillery. It opened in the 1820s, and it was one of the first continuous distillation stills in the world. Yeah. A guy called Robert Steen invented that still, the patent still, in 1828, and it went into Kirkliston Distillery, where Edinburgh Airport is today. And then once he'd finished his trials, it was then moved into Cameron Bridge. 2 years after that, Aeneas Coffey invented the coffee still, which went into his distillery in Dublin, and he obviously took the credit. And when people talk about continuous distillation, Aeneas Coffey, who looks like a member of Mastodon, he really does. He really does. Yeah.
Or a homebrewer.
Yeah, or a homebrewer who loves Mastodon or Meshuggah.
I think they all love Mastodon. Frankly, they all probably.
I think they probably do. That's their jam when they're sniffing hops or whatever it is they're into these days. But yeah, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, Cameron Bridge Distillery. So it's an old distillery. Many people think that it's this brand new fabricated super distillery, but it's not. It has its roots deeply in history with the Haig family who owned it. The Haig brothers. In fact, Robert Steen was their cousin, who was an engineer, and actually it was kind of necessity became the mother of invention. They came to him with their issue, and their issue was, we need more whiskey and we need it produced in a continuous fashion. Sure. So he took actually an idea from a French guy called Sir Anthony Perrier, who in 1825 at Spring Lane Distillery in Dublin came up with a crude version of continuous distillation. Didn't work particularly well. Yeah. Robert Steen saw that idea, and he was like, I'm going to improve on it. And then 2 years after that, Aeneas Coffey took that idea and then improved on it again, preheating the wash, which was a very cost-effective way. And it's still used today. It's cost-effective and such an ecologically friendly way of distilling. It just makes complete sense.
It does. So thinking about contrast for a moment, right? So you are a very tech-forward guy. Your presence on social media is... above none. It's like you're there, you're taking pictures of all stuff. It really, really looks good. So you have really 1 foot into the future and technology and 1 foot in the past. So you're a punk rocker that also works for a big corporation with a soul, right? So this kind of balance for you, do you feel creatively and maybe even spiritually that you have this kind of balance with all these things going on in your life?
Well, if I was to put on my kind of introspective theological hat.
Yeah, which this one is not. This is a USCSS Nostromo.
It is.
That may be a good thinking hat.
It's a replica hat from the original Alien movie, 1979.
This was the hat that Harry Dean
John Hurt wore as well.
John Hurt? Oh, he did?
Yeah, before his chest exploded.
I thought it was the Harry Dean Stanton hat, but that's okay.
Oh, maybe he did. Harry Dean Stanton, who was also in Escape from New York.
Yes.
One of my favorite movies.
John Carpenter is my favorite movie maker of all time. So we can talk about that. Yep.
That was a high five.
That was. But this scene that got us to clear the mind a little bit. Balance?
Yeah. And there always has to be balance. You can't be like balls to the wall, foot to the floor, 24/7 all the time. Yeah. Otherwise, you have burnout. You have to have that moment of introspection. You have to have that moment where you have to gather your thoughts and think about what you're going to do next in a measured way, because it has to make sense. It has to make sense to you, and it also has to make sense to the people who you're going to talk to. So a good example of this is we have a series called Bar Labs, and your friend Jorge does a phenomenal agave bar lab, and we travel the country offering high-level education to the trade. So it can be anything from like blending labs with Scotch through to agave, through to batching, through to draft systems, and one that I just wrote recently was a sensory one, which is very near and dear to my heart because I'm an olfactory beast, and that's what I do day in, day out. Is I sniff and I taste and I analyze. So I thought this would be great because a few years ago on World Class, when we were on tour with World Class, we did a kind of tamed down version of a sensory lab. What I wanted to do was really blow it apart and get more science heavy and geeky on it, and understand why things taste the way they taste, and look at the chemical components that make up pineapple, for example, or strawberries. Look at why things taste sweeter than other things, and different types of sugars, different types of acids. We teach people how to use refractometers because, the amount of sugar that we put into drinks is sometimes ludicrous. If you're buying a tiki drink, you have no idea how much sugar is in there, but there's going to be a lot. You can guarantee yourself, the base level of some rums is very high, the amount of simple that they're using in there, the amount of fruit juices that have got a lot of inherent sugars in them in there as well. So understanding just how much sugar people are consuming and how much sugar these people are serving and making them cognizant of that was an important thing for me. As well as that, we talk about salts and we talk about umami. And using umami in a careful, considered way to amplify flavors so you can use less sugars. Or, using saline solutions to counter bitterness rather than using sweeteners, for example. And we do a really good example, and you can do it if you get like a fairly bitter coffee. And some people love bitter coffees. I personally do not. But adding just a small amount of like a 20% saline solution to bitter coffee, you completely dip that bitterness. So if you are given like a very bitter drink, you can add just a tiny amount of salt in there. It will counter it.
It actually allows your brain to navigate the flavors.
Yeah.
That's what it does. It triggers and it can add some clarity.
And also, like, if you have something that's so bitter, that's the thing. Like, when you drink it, something like a Malort, for example. For the folks out there who've never tasted Malort, it's a Swedish kind of aquavit-based thing. It's very powerful. It's wormwood based. It's got a lot of dill and caraway in there as well. It's like the worst kind of bitter character that I have tasted. Bartenders in Chicago go nuts for it, and they seem to be the only people on the planet that go nuts for it.
Well, it's hard to admit mistakes, right? And people don't do that. Like who they voted for, or making a movie that wasn't really worth rewatching or putting out in the first place, like Escape from LA. But anyway,
or the Ghostbusters reboot.
Yes. We all have regrets and we'll never admit it, but maybe that's part of growing up.
But going back to the bitterness, if you have that overpowering flavor, and then they put it in a cocktail, and I've had Malort cocktails, and all you taste is Malort, then what is the point in adding it? If you have other ingredients in there that you're wanting to showcase, then why have something that completely blankets it?
Right.
So in this lab, we talk about balance. We talk about, the perceived, the human perception and like where our thresholds are with bitterness and sour and sweet and salty, and where their levels should be in terms of ratios. So we talk about ratios fairly extensively in there. We talk about how to use pH meters. So for me, going back to your original question, my creative outlet, I was given enough time to sit and work on this lab. I worked on it for probably about 5 months. Constantly, I read, I don't know how many books. I have them all on my phone. So I can show you them. I have a Dropbox file of all the books that I purchased, and I don't know how many books I read. more than a dozen, all on sensory, going back to like this French guy in the 1800s. And they did an English translation of his book, so I went through all of that. So I went through the basics and like the genesis point of sensory and olfactory, all the way up to, you know, the modern day Dave Arnold, booze, science, ultra nerdy kind of stuff.
So diving into things intellectually and cerebrally, that's a good way for you to perhaps quiet down and get some inner balance too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, because then you can kind of take solace in the fact that when you are talking about these things, you know what you're talking about, and you can talk with conviction, and you can talk with passion, and you can also have a message as well. And that's a really important thing, is what is the underlying why? Why are we doing it? Sure. And the reason why we're doing it is we want bartenders to be better bartenders, and we want bartenders to stop putting so much sugar in their drinks when they don't have to, when they have other options that are available to them. You know, they can use all sorts of fancy like bee pollen bitters or ambergris or all of these weird and wacky things, but yet the base things that they're working with are all fairly rudimentary. You know, they're using lemon and lime for acid, and they're using simple or dem syrup, and that's it. That's the full gamut. But then you look behind their bar at how many mezcals they have, or how many bitters they have, or tinctures that they have, or, you know, how much like very esoteric spirits that they're going to throw in there, and then spending 45 minutes making garnishes, all of this kind of stuff. But then the foundation of it is still built on this fairly rudimentary foundation.
It's almost superficial in a lot of cases, right? You're adding these things for a show, and then to your point, the foundation itself is cracked or antiquated at best.
Well, exactly. It's like building your house from the top down rather than the bottom up. So why start up here? And I know that a lot of bartenders see I hate this word, star tenders, all of these very fancy ingredients that they're using, and they're like, you know, if I want to be there, I have to do this. But you know what? You have to understand the basics, and you have to understand the fundamentals, and you have to be able to make a good Tom Collins if someone asks for it, or if someone comes in and asks for a Cosmo, you don't sneer your lip, turn around like breathing out and saying, sweet Christ, why am I here? You say, I'm going to make them the best Cosmo they've ever had.
You play a 3-chord verse, or in some cases a 2-chord verse if you're the Ramones. And
but they did it well, though.
They did it because they said, we know what we're going to be. And they could always, like Pet Sematary as a soundtrack, that's a little bit creatively expansive for them, which is nice.
Yeah.
But that's where you start.
Yeah, exactly. Or even if you go back to like the first heavy rock bands that were out there, so bands like Death, not the death metal band, like the black punk band. Or you look at even like Black Sabbath.
Oh, dude.
You know, like they were taking old blues licks, and they were just
slowing the shit down.
Drop D or drop E,
putting
it through feedback and fuzz in huge cabinets, and none of them were dummy cabinets, and then having Bill on drums, like being the shit out of drums, and it was like blues on crack, but it was a completely different dynamic. But it was the same fundamentals.
You're absolutely right.
So starting off with these same fundamentals, you can fashion all sorts of flavors that you want to, but understand the basics and understand where your foundations are before you start going pie in the sky.
Listen to Sabbath before you listen to Yes or King's Crimson.
Or Sleep.
Yeah, that's very fair. But like get the so if you can't tell, I always, as an analogy, use music as a way to tie everything together, because people kind of understand. Well, I suppose they understand that, but everybody gets Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
you know, that makes sense. So again, I'm thinking about this whole illustrious career that you have, and I promise this is all going somewhere, but it is all revealing little elements of your personality along the way, right?
Like layers.
That's right.
I feel like we're in an episode of Shrek. Right? Is there episodes of Shrek? I don't know. There should be.
There should be. So I wonder. I talked to Jack Teeling a while back. And obviously his father was instrumental in changing the perspective about Irish whiskey and stuff. And so you're 3rd generation distillery worker, brand guy.
Yeah.
So making that choice to go and get away from the business, was there any bitterness or any kind of, well, maybe you shouldn't do that when you were going on your journey, like from the family?
No.
They were good with it.
They were good with it, 100%. You know, my parents, God bless them, they were like, you know, whatever makes you happy, you find your own path in life. You're smart enough to make your own decisions.
Yeah.
we're not overly concerned. And then they found out I lived in a tent for a year, and there was maybe a little hesitation there.
A little cringe, I think.
Well, they were like, so long as he's happy. And I was extremely happy. It was the most carefree I've ever been in my life, I think. I got up out of my tent. I went for a run. I sat on a beach. I worked. I came home. I cooked. I slept.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat, in one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
It's amazing.
It was incredible. Carefree, completely.
Yeah.
But as you move through life, you find your own way, and I'm a firm believer in that. And my son,
I was going to ask you, how is fatherhood for you?
It's great. I can't recommend it enough.
Okay, honestly. I thought there was going to be ellipses there.
No. I
can't recommend it.
There was no ellipses. Although one of my favorite bands, Biffy Clyro, one of their albums is called that. A Scottish band, if no one's ever heard of them.
Great rock band. I thought they're from Britain. Sorry, I didn't realize they're from Scotland.
They're from near Kilmarnock in Ayrshire.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
they're a great band for sure.
3-piece kind of proto-punk Scottish band.
Great melodies.
Trying to break the U.S. market at the moment. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, no, being a dad to me is incredible. I have a daughter who's nearly 15.
Oh wow!
And she's inherited my sense of humor. So she is a pistol. She is incredible. I can't recommend having kids enough. I've said that probably 3 times.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. It improves you as a human being. You also start to think about responsibility to the planet, and you don't think
what you're passing on, right?
Yeah, you don't think in a selfish kind of solipsistic way where it's just me. It's more about them and their thems and moving forward with that. But my son actually is in the hospitality industry.
No way.
He moved to Ireland actually a fefew months ago, and he's only 18. A lot of his friends went to college. He's like, Dad, I don't think I want to go to college because I don't know what I want to do yet. He's still a young kid. He's like, well, I can probably help you out. So I spoke to a few people, and a friend of mine spoke to one of his friends who runs a castle in Ireland. Very fascinating. So she wants to do movie makeup special effects.
Cool.
That's her jam. And one of my good friends works for Lucasfilm, and he's taken me around there a bunch of times, so I took my kids there.
Yeah.
She kind of fell in love with the whole special effects thing.
That's incredible. Are you a horror guy?
I do. So I'm kind of, as I get older, I've become more of a pussy. Whereas when I was younger, I used to watch all sorts of horror movies and loved them. And I still like them, but they affect me more deeply than they used to.
Do you think it's because of the kids?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. 100%. You become hypersensitive to things as you move through life. Whereas, when you're young and indestructible, right, it's like water off a duck's back. But as you get older, you start to think of the ramifications for everything. And you're like, oh, I can't believe that they just did that. Their parents are going to be horrified.
Dude,
to pardon the pun.
So Dr. Bill Lumsden was in town recently. I got to interview him. We both have a love of horror movies. But the thing is he likes the really raunchy ones.
Oh, really?
He was listing off stuff. I'm like, dude, you know about that? So I hope that there's this inner community of horror lovers. Like
Dario Argento stuff?
Oh, that's mild compared to what he was talking about.
Oh, really? Like what?
There was this movie. Well, so like Cannibal Holocaust. Which
probably
Italian.
The toughest. Yeah, they got taken to court, actually. They had to bring the actors in to prove that they hadn't been killed because they thought it was a snuff movie.
You're absolute Deodato Ruggiero. Yeah, that's one of the greatest stories of film. And the thing is when they shot that movie, the cast hardly could speak the same language, and so they never saw each other again. He wasn't even able to track down all the cast because they didn't keep in touch. It's so crazy. It was just money for a job. But anyway, that's the thing is that throughout Scotland, there are these kind of cool undercurrents of punk rock and of horror movies and all of that. But when all of this kind of comes together is Game of Thrones. You've got cinematic sensibilities and you've got Scotch. And so, as we know, the sought-after line of Scotches from Diageo, was it your bright idea to say, you know what would be nice? Let's make Scotches dedicated to the houses of Game of Thrones.
It was not my idea. Okay. No, as much as I would like to sit here and take the credit for it, it was definitely not my idea. So that the idea actually came through from meetings with the show's creators.
Oh, man.
So D.B. Weiss and those folks. So they're huge Scotch fans. They spoke to HBO and said it would be great to have a Scotch partnership. Diageo being the largest producer with 29 single malt distilleries were the obvious choice to talk to. So they came to our team, our innovation team, and I came on relatively late in the process. So like all of the paperwork had all been done, and the ethos was there and the thought process was there. I was brought on to help shortlist the whiskeys. So I was given this long list of whiskeys, and I sat there and I poured through them, and I was like, this hasn't been available in the United States before. It would be great to bring Royal Lochnagar in the United States, because I love Royal Lochnagar. It would be great to bring a cask-strength Clynelish at an affordable price point. So can we do that, please? Yeah. So my wish list, and I worked with our wonderful innovation team, and we sat in a room and we went through these great liquids. We finally whittled down the ones we wanted, and then that was given to our team in Scotland, our blending team in Scotland, to see if they had enough liquid, if it was going to be viable to do it. And then through a fairly iterative process that I don't have time to go into, but a great process, a very creative process, they then spoke to our archive team. We have an archive team in Scotland, in Menstrie, run by a wonderful woman called Christine, who is actually coming to Tales of the Cocktail this summer. I'm doing a seminar with our archive team called Raiders of the Lost Archive. Nice. I came up with that. I was very proud of myself.
That's a better creation than the Game of Thrones scotches, frankly, Ewan.
You said that, not me. So Christine runs the archive, and there's a wonderful lady there called Joanne McCarricker, who is our malts historian and archivist, and they showed her the short list, fairly extensive short list, and she's like, this has to make sense. She was very familiar with the show. She reread the books, rewatched the show, and went, here are the genuine connections between them. Wow. So, for example, Cardew was run by two generations of very powerful women, so it made sense that they sat within the house. Yeah. She went through this for a good couple of months, so it all made complete sense. So it didn't seem contrived. Right. And then once she was happy with it, they were like, here's the distilleries that make sense. Here are the whiskeys you shortlisted from each of those. Now you need to make a decision on which ones you're happy with and the ABV that you guys are happy with. We then picked what we liked, and then the Scotland blending team went away and created the commercial liquid for it.
It's a really interesting way to do it. Because you kind of say, well, we got to have it for one, right? It's got to be somewhere. We want to bring things that are new. So like that loggable one is a different configuration.
They're all new.
Yeah. Never existed in that.
Yeah. Every ABV single one of them were created bespoke for that range. So absolutely everything was built from scratch.
And I didn't know the Clynelish was cask strength.
Yeah.
Which house is it?
That's a really good question. It's the Northy one.
The North one. Oh, the Winterfell one? No.
That one.
Oh, what is the... Well,
I should really know this off the top of my head.
Okay, well,
anyway, it's the Clynelish one, and it's delicious.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they have it here in town. In fact, when I go for a frozen Irish coffee later on at Nickel City,
that might be the one to
I'll see if they let me have one.
So you watched the show?
I do.
How you feeling so far? 2 episodes in, season 8.
I have a theory on what's going to happen next.
Good, just because it can't be a spoiler because it's a theory. What do you think?
My theory is that, so the show's been great up to this point, but they're obviously on a simmer before they go on a full boil for
it's
the
all
last
foreplay.
Yeah, before the last 3 or 4 episodes of complete carnage.
Sure.
So I think that in the next episode, and this is just a theory, I do not know, is that they keep referencing the crypt. Go to the crypt. The crypt is safe.
Right.
Everyone should hide in the crypt, apart from Bran, who's sitting there all wise, saying, no, don't go there.
Right.
But what's the crypt full of?
Well, to bury the dead, but also to...
Dead people. And what does the Night King do?
Oh, my gosh.
He brings the dead back to life.
Oh, dude, I didn't even think about that.
So my theory, the next one, they're all going to be down there, and then the dead are going to come back and attack them in the crypt.
Oh, my God. That's remarkable.
That's what I think.
There's also this theory, too, that Bran is the Night King.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Well, they make some kind of, now it might be a large swing, but they make some kind of insinuation that the face is the same.
Uh-huh.
And somehow it's just an evolution of a time.
I hadn't seen the face thing. I'd heard like I I go on the Reddit.
Yes, in
and,
quotes.
Yeah, and there's a wormhole that you can get lost in for as long as you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of the theories there that he is somewhat complicit in the whole thing, and he's there as like the deep mole,
Yeah.
just to disrupt things and guide them in the wrong direction and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. Who knows?
I don't know. It's fun to think that anything's possible, though.
Yeah,
That's the piece I think is really riveting.
but they could do with a Trojan horse, and he's
already
already got the wheels.
Yes, he's got a horsey face. Doesn't he? A little bit of horsey face.
He's somewhat equine in feature.
Those bangs for sure look like man. So it's
Bran biscuit.
Brand hooves. There's so much that we could talk about it. This could be 3 installments. This could be 3 chapters and stuff. And you have this great legacy already, and it's over 28 years in the industry and all of that. So I got 2 questions left, and that is, you already alluded to Nickel City, of course. You guys got barbecue for lunch, right? Where'd you go for?
We went to La Barbecue.
Oh, La Barbecue.
Yep.
Perfect. Had you beautiful stuff. It's always good.
I've been there many times before.
Yeah.
I'm a fan.
Can't get it anything like that anywhere else either.
No. So in terms of like food terroir, it's incredible down here, and I don't want to upset too many people, but Texas barbecue, hands down, best barbecue in the United States.
Agreed. So no argument there.
Yeah. Next time I go to the Carolinas, I'm probably gonna get lynched for me, or talked to very sternly.
Yeah, there'll be some finger wagging
over some peach tea.
It's a bourbon. Oh no!
No.
Don't make you drink bourbon. So Nickel City 2's on the docket, sounds like?
I think I will go there. A couple of friends work there, so I'll go and say hi to them.
Great bunch of folks over there.
And they serve some delicious George Dickel barrel.
Nicole, I finally get to interview her a few weeks, about a month ago or so.
Yeah.
Amazing. Dickel number 12, I'm trying, not single-handedly, but I'm trying to make sure people drink it because that price. So that's my promise to you, and you didn't even ask, but I am trying to make sure people get their hands on these bottles. And that bottle to bond that's come out.
Oh, yeah.
Just remarkable stuff.
It's unreal, right?
It's so good, man.
I was very lucky. I was down at Dickel a couple of weeks ago, and we got a chance to taste it there. And she has done a phenomenal job of that Dickel bottle and bond. It's one of the best liquids I've tasted in a long time.
Well, and you don't expect it. The feeling, because it's so elegant and bright and punchy, but yet so balanced, is why you don't think it's Dickel.
Yeah.
Obviously, or actually, a lot of times, people they don't regard Dickel as a good whiskey, but it's intensely delicious and rounded.
Well, people in the industry do.
Sure.
I had a good conversation with Jimmy Russell a couple of years ago, and he was like, George Dickel, hands down, one of my favorite whiskeys of all time, and I wish we owned it. And like, I was completely unprompted.
Yeah, wow.
And I was like, you're right, it is, but not enough people know about it.
Right.
And that's kind of what makes it nice. It's like having your favorite restaurant that no one really knows about, because you can go there and you can get a seat, and then everyone finds out about it, and it becomes Franklin Barbecue, and you have to wait 4.5 hours to get in there. But it deserves more exposure than it's got. Obviously, the heartline like Tennessee and Kentucky and places like that, people are very au fait with it, and they know it very, very well. Yeah. But if you talk to someone in North Dakota about George Dickel, they're probably going to be scratching their head, and they'll say, there's only one Tennessee whiskey,
right? And
we drink it with Coke.
Well, it's a big enough playing field that both those guys can be on it, and they're so different,
And they're both great whiskeys. They're just very different.
Sure, totally different deal. We all get a little upset when our favorite band gets big.
Mm-hmm.
Like Green Day was on the lookout for a long time playing basement shows and stuff. Then all of a sudden they really blow up, and people are just moaning about it.
Or post-Bleach Nirvana.
Yeah, post-Bleach Nirvana. Post-Sub Pop Soundgarden. All these guys. But you know what? There's enough room for the growth, and I think it's about time to have a little bit more of a Dickel Rising.
Yeah. Dickel Rising. Yeah. There you go.
Is that a new punk band name, too?
I think it's going to be.
Well, my last question for you, and I'm going to make it specific. Normally, I'll leave it more open-ended, but let's just say Clynelish 14. Okay?
Right.
So you're sipping that anywhere in the world, doesn't matter. And you can sit and have a conversation with any living or deceased punk musician. Who would you love to sit and have a dram with?
That's a really, really tough
Sure,
question.
yeah.
Because there's so many different conversation pieces I would want to have. Like I can be as nerdy as I want, but I can be as like goofy as I
Sure,
want,
yeah.
and you can run the gamut in the punk world
Mhm.
there. But I think I would love to sit down and have drinks with. Does it have to be one person, or can it be a band?
Dude, band's fine for sure.
I think I would like to sit down and have drinks with the Descendants,
Oh man.
the Beach Boys of punk.
Oh dude. When I was a young kid, 15 years old, I kept bugging this music director at the local station in Salt Lake City. He owed me a CD, Stranger Than Fiction by Bad Religion, in fact. And I was like, can I have my CD? You told me you could get it. So
That was
he said, just come down.
1996, I think. That came out.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right.
So he said, come down to the station and I'll just pick out a bunch of stuff. And so I ended up being his intern
Right.
for a summer and then some. And then I got to go to all the shows. So remember when Everything Sucks came out? Which I think is really a beautiful return to form for the Descendants.
Yep.
I ate lunch with the Descendants as a kid, and Bill was just shoveling it in, dude. I still remember that. 23 years later. He's such a massive dude, and he was like, bump, bump, bump. And like, I guess he needs all that for that fast drumming that he does. But, Descendants a great one.
Yeah, but then have you seen Filmage, the movie about them?
No, I haven't seen
Oh, you should check it out. It's basically the story about them, Hermosa Beach, and being on the fishing pier and hanging out there and just being like stoner bum punk kids.
Dude.
Throughout the whole, like, they started listening to a lot of melodic music, like the Monkees and the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to rip off their melodies and then turn it up to like 180 BPM. And that's basically what they did. They just took old like surf records and then janked it up. And then everyone jumped on it. It was like, oh, they actually have melodies. And they're talking about, being rejected and being nerds and being geeks and, the disenfranchised youth, but they were doing it in a kind of nice way. It wasn't like, Reagan Youth, for example, who are just like ranting against, Republicans and authority. Yeah. They were talking about like being awkward and growing up and
stuff we actually all go through.
Yeah, things that everyone could relate to. And they really did kind of get a huge following off the back of being genuine. And then to this day, they're still touring as hard as they ever did. Obviously, Milo went to college and they made an album about it.
Do you know, this is what I've heard. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. Do you know where he works?
No.
At least up until recently.
He was a scientist, or he is a scientist.
For 3M. He was a chemist for them. And we're on the East Coast, and he would just come back and do tours and take vacation.
Oh, really?
Isn't that crazy?
And invented a new type of caffeine. Hypercaffeine spasonate.
Oh, really?
Did you hear about that?
No.
Oh, yeah, he did.
What the shit, really?
Because they're such coffee nerds.
Yeah.
He created this, like, turbocharged version of caffeine.
Just what we need. Faster Descendants. That doesn't make any sense, man.
But, dude, they're hurtling towards their 60s, and they're still rocking as hard as they ever did.
They're still good. Man, well, there's so much more chat to have, and hopefully I'll visit you soon, and we could sip more scotch and all that. But Ewan, it's been just a pleasure, man. Everybody's like, this guy's great. He's into punk rock. I'm like, okay, good, then we're fine.
I do listen to a lot of punk rock. I listen to all sorts.
Yeah, it's a very, very big gamut. Biffy Clyro, I mean, that's sensible pop rock in a sense.
Yeah, Yeah.
So
like prog pop rock.
Yeah,
I guess they are now.
They start emo.
Post
it is because they started like around.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of your trip in Austin, and I'm gonna go seek out that cast strength Lagavulin for Game of Thrones.
Like Clynelish.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Clynelish is the Lannister house.
Yeah.
Cast strength.
But the 9-year-old Lagavulin is phenomenal as well. It's dusty.
Yeah.
It's smoky. It's sweet. It's rich. It's bananas.
It's good. It's good stuff. So you know what? Good job, man.
Thank you so much.
Well done on the line, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah. Well, cheers.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you so much. Plastic clink. Because we classy sitting on a floor.
The most punk rock interview you'll ever do.
Cheers. Thank you.
So there we have it. Everybody was telling me how cool of a guy Ewan Morgan is. And you know what? They're right. He and I hit it off. We hung out. I mean, we sat in a hotel ballroom because the heat turned my computer and his phone off. So we had to head indoors, sitting on the ground of an empty ballroom at a corporate hotel with 2 microphones in our hands. That is, in essence, punk rock podcasting, if you will. So it's great talking about movies, music, fatherhood, fishing, relaxation, and Scotch, of course. So, Ewan, thanks so much for taking the time out to chat with me. Hope to have a sip with you soon. I'm sure we'll make it happen. And thanks, everybody, for listening to Show to V with Mike G. No matter if you're wondering if you're disappointed or relieved that Lucifer Season 4 has concluded on Netflix, or if you're thinking, man, John Wick 3, how many dudes can he shoot in another movie? Please keep dancing.